Hey everyone, welcome church family. It's Tuesday and it's time for another Tuesday talk with Craig. For those of you who are joining me live, I'm glad to have you with me, and for those who are watching later, glad to have you join us whenever you can. I want to start today by asking you a question to have you kind of think about during this talk, and the question is, where is your focus these days? Or maybe another way of saying it is, what are you focusing on these days? Some of us maybe are focused on the Calgary Flames. They're playing later today, hoping that they're going to pull out a win. It's a little nerve-wracking watching them play. That's kind of a fun thing to focus on. There's lots of other things going on in our world that are vying for our attention, and you're probably finding that your focus is going in maybe many different directions. For those of you with children, you're maybe thinking about the return to school and all of that. Some of you are employed in a school or a school board, and that's where your focus is with all of the changes coming up this fall. Maybe you're focused on different aspects of news headlines that are circulating, things that are on social media. It seems like every week, if not every day, there's something drawing our attention and vying for our attention. So the question I want to really focus on today is, where is your focus, or who or what are you focusing on? Last week I told a story about the disciples on a boat with Jesus, and I'm going to share another story about a boat with the disciples and a bit of a storm and Jesus showing up. And it's found in Matthew chapter 14, and I'm actually just going to read this story and then kind of draw a few things out of it. So Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 22, and this is just after Jesus fed the 5,000, and it says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side of the lake, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it." So again, we've got the disciples in a boat, a bit of a storm brewing. And it says in verse 25, "Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.'" And now look at what happens next. Peter gets involved. He says, "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." I don't know what was going on in Peter's mind. If I was in the boat, bunch of waves, and all of a sudden Jesus is out there on the lake walking on water, I don't think I'd be like Peter. I don't think I'd be inviting Jesus to ask me to come and join him. So Peter's a different personality type than I, obviously. Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And so Jesus says, "Come." And then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Now listen to what happens next. So here you've got Peter, gets out of the boat, starts walking towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So once again, just a couple things to think about here. Once again, we've got Jesus showing up in the middle of a storm. He kind of rescues the disciples. He shows his power over creation by calming the wind and the waves, and everything's kind of brought back to a state of peace. But in the midst of that, we have this invitation where Jesus invites Peter to come out of the boat and to begin to walk on water towards him. And if you look at what happened with Peter, the wind was always there. The wind was there when Jesus was walking on the lake. The wind was there when the disciples were in the boat. The wind was there when Peter got out of the boat. The wind and the waves were there the whole time. Peter begins to walk towards Jesus, but it says, "But when he saw the wind, he cried out." The wind was always there. For some reason, the wind caught Peter's attention, and his focus began to stray from being focused on Jesus to now Peter was focused on the wind. And that's when he began to falter. Jesus rescues him. He puts out his hand, grabs him by the hand. They go back to the boat. He calms the wind and the waves. He rescues the disciples from the storm again. So there's some compelling things we see about Jesus is just how much he loves his disciples, how much he's patient with them, how much he's willing to continue to reveal himself to them, and how he takes care of them. Even when they fumble, even when Peter takes his eyes off Jesus, Jesus doesn't punish Peter. He saves him. He's there with him. He cares for Peter. He loves him, and he rescues him. So some things maybe for us to think about going back to this question: where is your focus these days? What winds are circling around you? What storms are brewing around you? What circumstances are you focused on? There's lots, like I said earlier, there's lots that's vying for our attention these days, and there's maybe personal struggles, decisions, circumstances that you're facing. I know in my head, every day there's things that begin to circle, and the wind is vying for my attention. The wind of circumstances, the wind of headlines, the wind of changes that are happening around us. And these things can often get my focus. And the invitation for me and for you out of this passage is that Jesus wants us to focus on him. We don't need to literally get out of a boat and walk on water. But when we're in the midst of a storm, when the winds are howling against us, Jesus is inviting us to look to him, to focus on him, and to continue to walk towards him. Hebrews chapter 12 says, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." Jesus is the one that we need to really focus our attention on. And in the midst of all the circumstances, in the midst of the uncertainty, in the midst of the storms, the winds, or even in the midst of a hockey game with the Calgary Flames later today, somewhere in the midst of all that, our focus should be on Jesus. And we should be walking towards him. And when we fumble, when we look away, when the wind does grab our attention, Jesus is still there. He's still willing to put out his hand and to rescue us, to invite us back. He's willing to climb into the boat with us and with our friends or with our family. He's willing to calm the wind and the waves. We just need to continue to look to him, to focus on him. So I want to encourage you to do that today and in the days to come, whatever is going on in your life. And I know there's lots going on in people's lives, and I'm praying for many of you and the circumstances you're facing. And I'm praying that your focus will be fixed on Jesus. Your eyes will be fixed on him. In the midst of everything going on, you'll find ways to center your attention on him. And so maybe another question might be, what would it look like to focus on Jesus these days? What would it look like for you to fix your eyes on Jesus? What new habits or rhythms or routines might you explore in order to focus your attention and your gaze upon Jesus? So that's my Tuesday talk for you today. Thanks for joining me. And like I said, if you're joining in later, I'm praying for all of you these days that we'd fix our eyes on Jesus. We'll hopefully see you next week for another Tuesday talk. See you later.